All right, so questions. Do you guys have any specific questions for me tonight? Or, I mean, I can always come up with stuff, but if you guys have a specific question, I'm more than willing to start there. No, you can still go ahead and ask about the lab. Liz, do you have any specific things you'd like me to go over tonight as well? Yes, you will be making some modifications in the player test. And those are identified. If you look in the player test field, this one's fine here. Replace 999 with the correct expected values. So these values are not correct. You're expected to replace these values here. That is correct. Replace the assert true below and test to see if correct number of holes played. So there was an assert true statement here, and you need to replace that as well. Right. So let's walk through this player report score method again. If you guys don't mind, if you don't want to go over the report score method, then we can definitely go over something else. But okay, well, let's just kind of go over this report score method. So there's three things that the report score method is supposed to accomplish in this lab, right? Okay, so you're back to the test case. The test case, you're just modifying these numbers right here. These three numbers, 9999s, are not correct. So let's go over the report score, and I think it'll help solidify for you. So we have this report score method, and we want to write test cases for the report score. So what we know is the report score is going to take in three values, right? When I call this report score method, I'm going to have three values. The first is the hole that's being played. Okay, so that's value number one. The second value is par for the hole, okay? And the third value are the number of strokes that the player had to complete the actual hole itself. So when players start in a golf course, and trust me, I don't like golf any better than most of the rest of you guys do, okay? But they don't all start on hole one. You know, like when we would go play golf, heaven forbid, but if we were to play golf, we would start on hole one and we play through. But when you're playing a tournament, it doesn't work that way because everybody can't start on hole one. It would take forever to get through the end, right? So what you have is one foursome will start on hole one, and another foursome will start on hole two, and another foursome will start on hole three, and so on. Or maybe it's every other hole. I don't know exactly how it works. But then that way, everybody's starting and they are all rotating about the same time. And so then they all finish the whole round of golf at about the same time, give or take. Some take longer, some take less, right? Okay, so this information is coming in. Now, what's supposed to happen, the whole purpose of this report score method is, one, it's to increment, to keep track of the number of holes that have been played. Not the hole that is being played, but the total number of holes that have been played. So it's to add 1 to the number of holes that have been played. Right? Because if you tell me you've played hole number 2, that's 1 hole. And then you play hole number 3, now you've played 2 holes. Right? And then you play hole number 12, you've played 3 holes, and so on. So we're going to add 1 to the number of holes that's been played. 2. We're going to add to the total strokes. So you had 5 strokes and you had 4 strokes before. You've now done a total of 9 strokes, right? And then we're going to add to the versus par amount. And so the versus par is calculated, which is calculated as the number of strokes minus par. So if you took 5 strokes but par for the course is only 4, that means you were 1 stroke over par, right? If you took 2 strokes and it was a par 3, now you're 1 stroke below par, or a -1. Okay, so this is how these things are calculated. Okay, so if I were to call this method and give you the values of 1, 3, and 3, so this is the very first time I've called this method. Then we have holes played, we have versus par, or let's go with total strokes, and then versus par. So it's the very first time I'm calling this method. How many holes would I have played? Or let's start out. Let's initialize. First off, these values are initialized all to values of 0, right? So originally they contain 0. Okay, so holes played. How many holes will I have played after I report this score right here? Just 1. I've only played 1 hole. So I'm going to take my original value of holes played, which is 0. 0 plus 1 equals 1. Okay. Now in computer speak, that's going to be whatever our variable name is, and I don't have the exact variables here in front of me, but you guys can look at that. So that would be holes played, or whatever it is, equals holes played plus 1. Okay. So our original value of holes played is 0, so we take our original value 0 and we add 1 to it and we replace it with that. So this now contains a value 1. Now our total strokes, what is our total strokes going to be? Remember, here's how it is. Hole that's being played, par for the course, and the total strokes. And currently our total strokes has a value of 0. So what is our strokes going to be after I report this score right here? 3, right. So again, it'll be 0 plus 3 equals 3, or in the way that computers are, written, it'll be total strokes equals the total strokes plus the strokes that are passed in. So our in strokes, or whatever that explicit parameter is called. Okay. Now versus par is a little bit more complicated. So our versus par is computed as strokes minus par, and we currently have a value of 0. So what are we going to be adding to our versus par here? So what's our total going to be for versus par? In this particular case, it's going to be 0, because it's going to be our strokes, which is 3, minus our par, which is also 3, which is 0. So 0 plus 0 equals 0. And so what that looks like in computer language would be versus par equals versus par plus our in strokes, the number of strokes coming in, minus the in par, or whatever those particular explicit parameters are called. Okay, so these variable names, none of them are correct. They may be correct, they may just be a coincidence, but but you guys can look at the lab and figure out what the actual names of the instance variables are. All right, so this information over here is what you're going to kind of use for testing. this information over here is what it would look like in code. So let's go on down here and let's report another score. So now we're reporting another score. So we reported this score. So now our values are 1, 3, and 0. Okay. So we're going to report another score. Now we played hole 7. This is actually a par 5 and it took us 4 strokes. Okay. So holes played is going to equal what now? We reported, this is our second score that we've reported. How many holes have I played? Not what hole am I currently playing, but how many holes have I played? Right. So now I've played 2 holes. What are my total strokes now? Okay, so our strokes before were a value of 3. The third variable is our number of strokes. So this variable is our number of strokes. Yep, 7. And our versus par is going to be it's going to be -1, right? Because it's going to be 0 is what we had before, and it's the strokes minus par, and our strokes is 4, our par is 5, so it's going to be -1. All right, so let's report one more score, report score. So now we're playing hole number 11. It's a par 3, but we had a terrible, terrible hole, and it took us 7 strokes to do that. So holes played, what will holes played now equal if this worked correctly? 3, right? Total strokes will equal 14 because we had 7 before and now we have 7 more strokes. And then our versus par is going to equal it should be a 3 because we are 4 over par, but we previously had a -1. So 4 plus a -1 would be 3. Okay, so we've kind of figured this out. We figured out what's going on. We figure out how we're going to compute these things. But the question is, how do we do a test case? So if we have this first report score right here, so we have our object, okay, whatever our object is called. So player 1 is what I'll call this object. So I need to test this. I'm like, all right, I need to know, is my report score working right? So I'm going to call. So remember, the format for testing, remember, is always the same. Create the object. So call the constructor and create the object. So player 1 equals, and it's always the same format, equals new player, and we have to give it the name Joe. Okay, then we're going to call the method that we're testing on the object. So player, sorry, for some reason I cannot type player1 dot report score, and I'll pass it the values. So I'm going to pass it these values up here that I used because I was experimenting with these, so let's just pass them those values. Then I need to check, did it do what it was supposed to do? So this is where I'll do an assert equals, and I'm going to give it my expected value here, and then I'm going to do a player1 dot get holes played, or whatever the name of that particular method is. I don't, I'm not, you guys can look these up, but so for the holes played, what did we expect the holes to, number of holes to be played when we called this guy up here? 1, right? So we're going to put that in there. And then for the next one, our assert equals, we'll have a value, and then we're going to call player1 dot get total strokes, or whatever the name of that particular method is. And what did we expect our total strokes to be after we called this particular guy? Yep, 3. And then we're going to do the same thing for the versus par. So, oops, that didn't work as well as I was hoping it would. So let me take this value out. Player1.get versus par, or whatever the name of that method is, get versus par, and what value up here did we expect the versus par to have when we got done calling that report score? Yep, a value of 0. So this is how you would generate the test cases. Now, if I call my report score a second time, but now I give it these values, 7, 5, and 4, then these are what I would expect, 2, 7, and -1. So that's what I would give down here. All right, if I call it a second time, when I call these methods, this is what I'm going to expect to have returned. And then likewise, if I call it a third time, all within the same test area, so if I call it a third time, but I pass it these values, 11, 3, and 7, then I'm going to expect 3, 14, and 3. So those are the values I would put in here. Okay, so by working on these test cases, I'm like, all right, I know what my method, I know what parameters I'm going to have, hole that's being played, par for the hole, the number of strokes. I know what it's supposed to do, add 1 to the number of holes being played, add to the total strokes, add to the versus par. I've come up with 3 scenarios, so I call it and I make sure it worked, and then I call it again and make sure it continued to work, and I call it again and make sure it continues to work again, all within the same test case. Now, if all of these pass, then it did what it was supposed to do. But if it doesn't pass, then I need to go look at that report score method in my player class and check it out. Like, why is it not doing? I know what it needs to do. It needs to do this sort of thing, right? Add 1 to the holes played, add to the total strokes, and then add to the versus par. So why isn't it not, if it's not passing, why isn't it doing that? And I need to go look at that particular method and then figure out maybe my logic is bad in that method. All right, so questions. What do you guys think? Did this help? Does this confuse the matters more? What do you think? Definitely lots of practice for sure. And I know this is, a little bit confusing, especially if you're not familiar with golf, but the reality is that as programmers, we're expected to become the expert in whatever environment that we're put in. And so I know somebody had mentioned when I was looking at their lab that was like, oh, I wish this, golf, who knows golf? I wish it was baseball. But it would be ironic because if it was a baseball scenario, somebody else would go, I hate baseball. I wish it was golf. So it doesn't really matter what we pick. Somebody's going to like it. Somebody's not going to like it. But I think this is a little bit confusing here. All right, so the other area that you might run into an issue is calculating the percentage. So if you were to look at that Word document, it tells us in the Lab 1 Word document, it tells us how many holes there are on the golf course. Right here, how many holes are on a golf course? 18 holes on a golf course, right? So if at this situation I've played 3 holes, right? How would you calculate the percentage of holes that I've completed? Like what would be, I've reported the score for 3 holes, so therefore I've played 3 holes. So what would be the percentage of holes that I've completed? 3 divided by 18, or so you would think, right? So in normal math world, it would be 3 divided by 18, which would be 3 divided by 18 is 0.166667 in a normal world. Okay. However, Java deals with what's called integer. So first off, that's the first thing you need to check. You know your total holes. Those are stored in your whatever holes played variable, whatever that's called, that instance variable is called. And you also know if you're doing a test case, how many holes were played. So I would expect, so if I was doing the test case for the percent, I would do these same things again. And record 3 scores to test for this. Okay. And then I would do an assert equals 0.1666, well, it would be 16.6667, whatever it is. Player 1 dot get percent, or whatever this particular message, you know, blah, 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 blah is called. And then we also put a 0.001 or something on the end. This is what this thing on the end is called a delta. Say, just to make sure, this one would have the open and closing parentheses, whatever this is called. All right, this thing on the end is called a delta. Whenever you're comparing two values that have parentheses, such as both of these values. So this is going to return something, or sorry, decimal places. So this is going to return something that's a decimal place, a double value, and this is already a double value because it's 16.667. It already has decimals. You have to include what's called a delta value. And this delta value says close enough. Because here's the reality, a computer will take those decimal places out forever, right? If this is a repeating decimal, the computer doesn't care. It'll repeat a bazillion times. But we as humans have our limits. We're only willing to repeat so many times before we're going to stop. And so if the computer is repeating, 20 times and we're only repeating 3 times, those numbers are not equal. And so what we do is we give it a delta value that says, you know what, if it's equal to this many decimal places, so if it's equal to 3 decimal places, then as far as I'm concerned, we are close enough and these numbers are equal. So you can specify whatever you want. This is 3 decimal places, this would be 5, this would be a bunch more decimal places. Maybe you only need to go to 2 decimal places. It all depends upon what level of precision you need. If you're doing scientific notation, maybe you need to go out to 15 decimal places. If you're doing currency, maybe going to 3 or 4 decimal places is sufficient. So it all depends upon what you're needing. But this delta value, that's what this is called here, this is specified whenever you're comparing 2 doubles. All right, so this would be how we would write the test case to do, to check for the percentage, all right? So we would compute it ourselves. So we would say, all right, I'm going to report 3 scores. That's 3 holes. I know there's 18 holes on the golf course. If I divide those two, it's 0.1616 it's percentage. So it would be 16.6 blah, 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 7. And I would write this out. And then I could even report a couple more scores here. And now I've got 5 scores that reported. And I could recompute 5 divided by 18 and whatever that value is. And I have to really do this with my calculator. Okay. 5 divided by 18 is 27.778. So another repeating number. Okay. And I could just do it again. I reported a couple more scores. Now I would probably change these. It doesn't really matter what values I do because I'm just checking for the number of holes played, right? I don't care about strokes or versus par or anything. So I could change this to be hole 12 and this to be hole 13 and then check it out. And again, I could even add a couple more and recheck the percentage and so on just to verify that it's correct. But as far as computing in the program, if it comes out that this percentage is not correctly computed, there's a couple issues we have in Java. The first is, are we indeed dividing by 18? Like, that's the number of holes on the golf course, so are we indeed dividing by 18? The other issue we have is what's called integer division. So in Java, there's three types of division that we have. We have regular old division, right? Where if we would divide 3 by 18, we would end up with 0.16667. We have integer division, which says if you divide one integer by another integer, you get an integer. And then we have modulus division, which actually returns to you the remainder. Okay, so we're going to start with integer division. So in integer division, if you divide, well, you need to spell that right. If you divide one integer by another integer, the result is an integer. The remainder portion is ignored. So if we have 3 divided by 18, that is actually 0 remainder 3, right? That's what that is, 0 remainder 3, because 18 goes in 0 times and we have a remainder of 3. So that is only going to return to you the integer or the initial port. I don't know what that's called in division. It's going to give us a value of 0 because these are both integer values. 3 is a whole number and 18 is a whole number. So that's considered integer division, which only returns to you the integer. So it's going to give us a value of 0. All right. Likewise, if I had 18 divided by 3, that would be, well, that's not a good one. 18 divided by 4, that is 4 remainder 2, right? So that's going to return us a value of 4. It's going to be a whole number. And I guess we could use 18 divided by 3 is going to give us 6 remainder 0, which equals 6. You have one whole number being divided by another whole number. The result is always a whole number. If I want double division, if I want the decimal places to come out here, one or the other numbers needs to be a decimal number. So I could have 3.0 divided by 18, and that is going to give me 0.166667. Okay. And I'm sorry that this is yellow. It must be the default as to what, because I set the language for Java and it must be defaulting it. Or I could have 3 divided by 18.0, and that is also going to be 0.166667, okay? Because the 3.0 is a double value, so that says, oh, double division, and gives me my decimals. Or 18.0 is likewise double, and so it says, oh, double division, give me the doubles. So you could do it that way, or another easy way to do it when you're dealing with variables as opposed to specific values is you can just multiply one or the other by 1.0. 1.0 is a double value, and so multiplying by 1.0 converts it from a regular number, from an integer, into a double. So we could have this dot holes played times by 1.0 divided by 18. And again, I don't know that this is the correct name for the instance variable, but you could take a variable and just multiply it by 1.0. So if this is an integer value, I have now, by multiplying it by 1.0, just converted this into a double. And when I divide, then this results as a double. Okay, oh great, so I'm glad that I am coinciding with the book. Say, or if 18 is, yes, if 18 is a whole number, you could just say this dot holes played divided by 18.0. If you're specifying that constant value, you could definitely go that way as well. Okay, so if you create your test cases for your calculate percent here, and you come up with these and you're not getting the right value, you need to go and look. And you need to say, well, am I dividing by the right number? Am I dividing by 18 holes on the golf course? If that's not correct, you could fix it and compile and run your test cases again. If you're still not getting it right and you know that the division looks solid, then check to see if you're doing integer division, and you have to go and look and see any variables, how are they defined, any constants, are they a whole number, and you'll need to convert so that one or the other is now a double value. Okay. The third kind of division that I talked about is the modulus division, which you're not going to get into that here, but you will get into it in one of the homework problems. I want to say like homework 7. You'll get into the modulus there. But what the modulus does is it returns to you the remainder, not the result of the division. So up there we had 3 divided by 18 equals 0 remainder 3. The modulus is going to return to you the value of 3. And when we had 18 divided by 4, which equals 4 remainder 2, the modulus would return to us a value of 2. And when we had 18 divided by 3, which is 6 remainder 0, the modulus would return to us the value of 0. Okay, I don't have a, I haven't had to use the modulus very often in my 30 plus years of programming, but I have used it. And usually when I'll use it is when I want to determine like a day in the week or something like that. So I've used it on a website when I want to display a different image each day of the week. And I have like 7 images and I want to know what day of the week it is. I'll display image 1 versus image 2 versus image 3. And so I'll just take the, use whatever date tools I have out there to determine the day of the week and divide that by 7, and whatever my remainder is tells me what image I need to display. So I've used it in situations like that, but I have not had a lot of instances where the modulus was used. So it is useful, and we're going to use it in a decoder ring type of an program a little bit. But okay, so other questions. Do you guys have other questions or something else that you want me to clarify? All right, let me pull that homework up, Dylan, and I'll be able to tell you more. Week 3. Oh, is this down there in the circle? Is there a circle somewhere down in here? Is that what that problem is? Okay, on this circle, so you're talking down here in the circle class. So no, but like don't make this too hard. Like people make this really hard, right? The circle class. So remember, we have a radius is what you're specifying to the circle class, right? So you're giving it a radius, and then you're going to check to see, we're giving you these methods for a reason. So we want you to call each one of these methods to determine, like if I give you a radius of 4, I would expect then if I call the getRadius method that you're going to return to me a value of 4, right? And then if you have a radius of 4, what would be the diameter? And that's the value you would expect. And if you have a radius of 4, what would be the circumference? And if you have a radius of 4, what would be the area? You're not physically computing these values, like you're not coming up with the formulas and all that. You're just calling an assert statement. So you're just going to do, like, first you're going to have to create your circle object, right? And we'll just call it circle 1. So you're calling your constructor to create your object. And then, and you're passing it a radius. So for example, let's say 4. And then you're doing an assert equals, and then whatever the circumference should be, right? And then you're going to call circle1.getCircumference. So let me ask you this. How would you figure out what the circumference is? Like if I were to just ask you, hey, If I have a radius of 4, what's the circumference? What would you do? So you're much better than I am. Here's what I would do. I would come out to my best friend Google here, very slowly apparently, and I would go circle circumference. And I would hope that there is something out here that tells me that I can actually plug in and get the circumference, and none of these are going to do it. But somewhere out here is probably a program that will actually calculate the circumference of a circle for me so that I don't even have to do it myself. Do I really have to do? And I'm not going to find one. So really, somewhere out here, you know what it is? It's this, no matter how many times I change my search engine, it keeps flipping back to Yahoo, which drives me insane. So somewhere out here is going to be something, or I could actually do a form, but you know what I mean? There you go. Whatever that is, Wolf M Alpha. So somewhere I would just find a program, a circumference calculator. There we go. Thank you. Okay, I know the radius, 5. And there we go. So the circumference, so if I give it a radius, if I create my object with a radius of 5, then I would expect my circumference to be 31.51 or 4159, my diameter to be 10, and my area to be that. So I would just plug in those values for those different things. So I would do an assert statement. So first I have to create my object. Always number one, you have to create your object. And then I would just call each one of those and I would just plug in those values that I found off of this website and plug those values in. Trust me when I say I am not going to go out and verify your values. Now, if it's obvious that your values are wrong, I may call you to task on it if it looks like you didn't even try. But but you can do the delta, right? So maybe you put in a delta that says, hey, as long as it's good to 3 decimal places, then you're all set. Yeah. Yeah, so you can sorry, I guess I missed your whole point. But yeah, you'll definitely want to put your delta value in your test case down here because you know you're going to be returning decimals. So maybe you point a 0.001, and as far as you're concerned, as long as the circumference equals up to 3 decimal places, everything is good. All right, so a long way to get to a long way to get to the answer of your question, but hopefully it helped somebody else. I mean, we're not expecting you guys to be major math whizzes and stuff on these homework assignments, right? So, you're just testing it to see if it's working. We're not expecting you to actually, write these calculations at this point. You're only writing the test cases. All right, so other questions. What other questions do you guys have? This is good stuff. Is that the guided learning assignments? Is that the week 4 guided learning activities? Doesn't say anything about a taxi cab. Week 3. Okay. All right. We need to upgrade this so it says like Uber or something instead of taxi cab, huh? So it's not that it's going to have 3 classes. I think that it has 3 methods within one class. Oh, it does have a taxi garage, and a taxi cab. So it's expecting you to write these classes. Did it give it to you? Oh, no, you go to your folder. Let me see. No, inside of here, there are all 4. It shows a taxi, but if you drill down, yeah, here's your taxi cab, taxi dispatch, taxi garage. So they're all in there. Taxi not available exception as well. So they're all in there. This should have been downloadable through. So if you go to week 4, then there's a taxi folder in week 4. But if you go in further, then there's the package that's inside of there. So they're all in there. I'm glad you're going through these guided learning activities. Oh, well, let me go back in there. Let me extract this. Slowly. I'm going to extract it slowly. All right, so if I go into BlueJ and open my project, didn't I just extract it? Oh no, it was a guided learning activities. Yeah, if I click on taxi, then I have taxi cab, taxi garage. I have all of them. You're only seeing the one? I'll email you guys this. Did you? Yeah, it should have. I'll email it to you. Don't forget that because it's a zipped folder, you have to extract it. So you'll have to extract it first before you're able to look at them. But yeah, all 4 should be in there. I'll email it out as soon as we're done here. Yep, cool. All right. Anything else you guys would like me to go over or demonstrate? Sure. Yep, it's perfectly fine. That's what we're here for today. That's what this is all about. I have that all the time. I'll be quite honest. Lots of people at work are like, "You just have a computer aura," because it's like they'll call me and they'll say it wasn't working, and then you get there and it is, and they're like, "I swear it wasn't working." I'm like, "Okay, yeah, whatever." I like them. They're easy for me. Okay, so yeah, the very last statement, and Matthew actually alluded to this as well. So what you're testing here, so there's an assert true statement right here, or assert false or something like that. I can't remember exactly what it says, but because I think I cleared it out. What you want to do is you want to, so these statements here, so up here I created a player with the last name of Mickelson, okay? And then we reported 3 scores. So you need to figure out if these are the 3 scores that reported, what values would you expect for holes played, for total strokes, and for versus par. So do a little bit of work just like we did earlier with the different ones that I chose, okay? Then you're going to look here and you're going to say, oh, this statement needs to go away. You're going to need to say Mickelson. So I'm going to check. I'm calling this toString method, and I'm checking, does it actually contain the value Mickelson? I gave it the value Mickelson up here, so it should contain the value Mickelson down here. And then is -1 relative to par, is that correct or not correct? Like if I calculate this through, is his versus par -1? And then they want you to add in the number of holes played. So what you have to do is you have to look at your Word document, because it's telling us the output. Nicklaus is -4 after 12 holes. Now this shows relative to par, so you actually need to go into your player down here at the bottom. And again, let me get this. I was fiddling around with stuff before. Okay, so it's going to print out the name of the golfer is space, the versus par value plus space relative to par after, and then the number of holes played, and then space holes. Okay, so, and I wasn't just saying all those spaces in there because I like to say the word space. It's because those are physically characters that are in this output. Okay. So what you're doing here is you want to make sure that, okay, so if I look at what's supposed to be outputted, so the name of the golfer. So yes, it should contain Mickelson. Is -1 relative to par? Is whatever par should be relative to par. Okay, so you don't necessarily have to have the keyword this, you could, but you need to have, we're checking for this phrase. So what it wants you to do is to add in the number of holes, and it should say after holes, after whatever number of holes played. So if they played 14 holes, say after 14 holes, right? So that's what they want you to do, is kind of duplicate this. But then instead of saying is -1 regular to par, change this to say after however many holes you figure out when you do these 3 things here, 14 holes. Okay, and then you're going to get rid of this statement down here. So comment it out, delete it, whatever, get rid of the one at the bottom, and insert 1 to check for the number of holes. Now, the computer is picky. So the spaces and everything needs to match exactly the way that you're given, all right? And how you can figure that out is once you've got this all compiled, if your toString is the only thing that's not passing, what you can do is you can compile your demo and run it, and it's going to output data and kind of show you how things are going to look. Now, it may not have these exact report scores, 5, may not be reporting these exact scores, so the values may not match, but you can at least see what the output is looking. And as you can see, Matthew experienced the space issue, so things were off by a space or something, right, Matthew? And wouldn't pass because you had a space or missing a space or something was missing. Spaces and variables. So you need to make sure your values are correct. Yeah. So you want to correctly calculate the number of holes, correctly calculate the score relative to par, you know, that sort of thing. So you need to make sure that that all is accurate. Did that answer your question, Ian? Well, it's a combination. So this is telling you to, you know, kind of, they're assuming that you'll copy this, you know, use this as a format to know what you're going to do. If you come over here, you can see what it's building as far as output. And then you also, keep pulling up the wrong one, you have information inside the Word document as well. So pulling all of those pieces together, the assumption is that you would be able to come up with this. But the reality is I never leave my students hanging to figure this stuff out. I don't know if you had a chance to watch the week 3 Q&A, but I went over this lab like in minute detail from start to finish. And so my intent is with every lab, I'm going to at least spend a good portion of one of the Q&A sessions going over the lab, and I'll identify that when I post it out to Piazza so you guys will know which Q&A. I mean, obviously, it's better if you can come because you can ask your own questions, but as a backup or refresher, you can always watch the Q&A recording to give you information as well. Oh, you know what? Don't be. You're learning a new language and a new way of thinking. And so it's challenging. I mean, you know, it's a challenging course. So don't feel, you know, if you're not picking it up right, you know, as quickly as it appears other people are, trust me, those other people have programming experience, and that's why they're picking it up quicker. I guess I've only had maybe 1 or 2 students in almost 12 years worth of teaching who have picked it up like whammo and they had never programmed ever before. Like if you've never programmed before, then there's a big learning curve. You know, so eventually you're going to get some light bulbs going off, okay? Eventually it'll be like, oh wait, ah, there it is, you know what I mean? It will happen, but it might take, you know, it might not be until after the midterm before things really start clicking. But yeah, so don't worry about it. You know, practice as much as you can, but it'll come. Yep. We got about 5 minutes left. Is there anything else you guys would like me to go over or any other questions? Yep, no problem at all. Well, mostly I wanted to go over that integer division versus modulus versus floating point division. But one thing I will say is as far as, so that we're in the middle of, even though you're working on homework 3, this is the middle of week 4, right? Or not quite the middle, but we're getting towards the middle of week 4. The midterm is week 6, so that means in a week and a half is the midterm. And the midterms for all programming classes are very challenging, but they're especially challenging when you're first learning a programming language. So in these first classes, they seem particularly challenging because you haven't experienced these type of midterms before. If you go out to the course website, it's going to be both. It's going to be true, false. It's going to be multiple choice, and it's going to be short answer, which short answer includes both definitions and coding. So you're going to expect it to write code, and it's no book, no notes. So you're expected to do everything based upon what you've learned. So the midterm is brutal. Okay, brutal would be the term that I would use on it. So what I would recommend that you do, if you come out to the course website, wherever the midterm is, week 6, I have a study guide here that you can download, and I've also got a little video that I've recorded where I walk through the study guide. What I would suggest is, if you're struggling at all, that right now you schedule a tutoring session for week 5, okay? That you download the study guide and you spend this next week or leading up to that tutoring session going over the study guide and highlight the items that are just a struggle for you, and then take it to that tutoring session and have them walk through those concepts. Okay, that would be hands down the best way to prepare for the exam. If you can't get in with tutoring, you're more than welcome to complete the study guide and then send it to me, and I'll review it and let you know what you got correct and what you didn't get correct on the study guide. But better is if you could schedule, and those tutoring sessions, man, they're going to start filling up big time. So if you can schedule it for week 5 now, you'll know for sure that you're going to have one if you need it. But if you wait till week 5, you may or may not be able to get one. So that would just be my last tip for the evening, is the sooner you can start working on this study guide, the better off you'll be when that exam happens. And with that happy, pleasant note, I'm going to call it a night. Certainly email me if you guys run into any issues, or better yet, post to Piazza, because that's where your extra credit comes from, right, is participation on Piazza. And I will see you hopefully on Thursday. Have a great night, everybody.